LoreWarrior Aerotech, LCF-R15 Lucifer. Overview. The LCF-R15 Lucifer medium fighters were built during a production run in 25-26. Designed to be well armoured and fairly well armed, they also have enough heat sinks to provide for tighter manoeuvres and prolonged weapons fire. The LCF series was plagued with difficulties from the start. Its structural problems forced a full recall in 25-28 and led to massive alterations to the Lockheed CBM frame. The weaponry coolant problems that became apparent a year later led to installation of the current Maxwell laser systems to replace the defective Randolph lasers. Both the targeting and communication systems on the Lucifer are sensitive to jarring and the electromagnetic waves common in combat. They require constant preventative maintenance, but are also usually slightly off and inaccurate. The fighter's armor placement causes imbalance during the dead stick glide re-entry, and the Lucifer also lacks an emergency ejection system. When the Lucifer's frame was refitted, the ejection system was removed entirely. Thus, the pilot is strapped into the craft until he lands, or crashes, whichever comes first. Despite all of these failures, it was produced in large enough numbers to become a prominent part of the arsenal of Haus Steiner, in whose territory most of these fighters were built. Capabilities. The Lucifer's main advantage is its large number of heat sinks, for they permit it a greater and longer concentration of weapons fire and overthrust capability in tight combat situations. Because the fighter is so slow, pilots have nicknamed it the Dragger. It nevertheless excels at attacking dropships in orbit because its large number of heat sinks allow it to move in fairly close to the dropships while sustaining some of the firepower these vessels can dish out. An attack force composed of Lucifers must usually be accompanied by an escort of faster fighters. They also require support vessels because of the large ammunition supply they carry. Internal explosions are common with Lucifer fighters, even outside of combat situations. Battle history. With the fall of the Star League, the Lyran Commonwealth found itself in a strong position because of the larger number of Lucifers within its sphere. Thus, the Lucifer suddenly became the mainstay of Haus Steiner's medium-class fighters. The craft's limitations became evident at the battle for Lorek against an attack by Haus Marek forces. A defending force, composed primarily of Lucifers, was attacked by dropships and fighters of Marek's militia during 29-13. Without support, the Lucifers were crippled severely. It was only with the arrival of reinforcements that the Steiner forces were able to fend off their attackers. In a raid on the planet Rochelle in the Free Worlds League, the Steiner fighter wing, led by 3 Lucifers, attacked the dropship of the 9th Regulan Hussars. With enough small fighter support, the Lucifers were able to penetrate the dropship's hail of fire and to cause severe damage. By 29-45, such Lucifer-led raids were common. Haus Lau forces crossed into the Commonwealth in 29-78 in hopes of catching the planet Saffel off guard. They were met in orbit by several Lucifer fighters whose endurance held the Lau attackers at bay until heavier fighters could be launched in its defense. A string of small disasters seemed to plague this class of fighters, however. In 3003, a strike group of 3 Lucifers led a reprisal on the Marek world of Bela. This deep penetration group took massive internal damage to their craft from ammunition explosions. The raid had to be called off, with most of the fighters involved scrapped for parts because of their irreparable damage. In another unsuccessful encounter, Lucifer fighters and some heavier fighters attempted to defend the planet Thorin against an attack by Haus Kurita. Most of the defenders were destroyed before they could launch, and others suffered structural damage trying to engage the enemy in Thorin's lower atmosphere, which is characterized by high buffeting winds. Variants. Haus Steiner has modified the armor placement on the R15 version of the Lucifer, which may make it easier to handle in atmospheric fighting in some cases. The R15 is usually seen in the unit attached to the Lyran Guards. Another version, known as the R20, reduces the craft's weaponry by replacing the Holly LRM rack with more armor and 3 more heat sinks. This heavy armored version is useful in situations such as anti-dropship combat, where prolonged fighting is likely to be necessary. Lucifer 2 is a Haus Kurita version, which they based on captured vessels. This variant reduces the craft's armor, ups the engine to a Mana Twist 20, and adds an SRM 6-pack to the weaponry. Haus Kurita is presently the only successor house making use of the Lucifer. Notable fighters and pilots. Lieutenant David Worthington. David Worthington is currently assigned to an air support unit in Richard's Panzer Brigade of Haus Steiner. In several raids, the lieutenant has used the Lucifer's heat capability to close in on targets that many pilots consider too dangerous to take on alone. He single-handedly engaged a Union dropship in orbit over Kurita-controlled Vega and succeeded in crippling the ship's engines. Worthington now has over 30 kills to his credit. Aerospace pilot Llewellyn Stewart. An arrogant and cocky pilot, Llewellyn is currently assigned to Steiners Royal Guards. He has a reputation for luck after being shot down in his Lucifer 4 times, always managing to come back. Though Llewellyn claims to have scored over 80 kills, official records show the totals to be closer to 25. His fighter is in poor repair, and the landing gear malfunctions 15% of the time, due to prior damage.